What is up, guys? This is Max Square, and as you know, High Sierra has just been released today, and so I thought why not go ahead and make a video about it and let you guys know if it's worth upgrading. But before we get started, I want to let you guys know that I'm going to be doing a live stream at 2:30 p.m. EST this Saturday. It probably won't be that long, but we had a ton of fun in the last one. You can ask me any questions you want, and I will probably end up showing you some of the projects I've been working on recently and just some of the ways I go about recording my videos. So I put a link down below, so if you want to set a reminder, you can check that out. So just like Sierra and El Capitan and other previous versions of macOS, High Sierra is available for free in the Mac App Store, so you can go ahead and check that out. I'll put a link down below. Now, I've been doing a ton of research over the last day or two, just trying to figure out what the main features are and trying to determine if it's really worth upgrading. So I've put together one master list of all the biggest updates that I've been able to find to help you guys determine if you want to upgrade to High Sierra. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I want to start with is Safari. Now, I'm actually a huge Chrome user, but some of the updates in the new Safari are actually tempting me to switch over to Safari as my main browser. One of the biggest features that have been added is that it's protecting your privacy from ads. So if you're shopping for an iPhone or you're looking on eBay for a pair of shoes and then you switch over to some other website that could be completely unrelated, then those shoes show up as an ad. Safari is trying to prevent that from happening by protecting your privacy. And so you can enable that by going to the preferences and then selecting these two options, prevent cross-site tracking, as well as asking websites not to track your browsing. Another cool thing is that you now have site-specific settings. So if you frequent a specific website, you may want to enable certain settings like the reader mode. So if you are a Safari user, you're familiar with this mode. Basically, this just simplifies the web page to give you just the content, and it tries to remove all of the navigation and other ads that could distract you from the actual content. But if you right-click on the website at the top, you can now click on settings for this website, and you can enable that reader. So anytime you land on that website, it just automatically enables the reader. And you can also enable content blocking. Another cool thing is that you can actually zoom in the entire web page, and this is super helpful for some websites that have really small text. I've actually found myself always zooming in on certain websites, and so now you can enable that so it remembers those settings. Another cool thing is if you go back to preferences and go to websites, first of all, you'll see all of the websites with those site-specific settings, but you can also enable that reader mode on all websites. So anytime you land on a website that is compatible with the reader, you can enable it automatically. You can also enable other settings like content blockers, the autoplay for videos, page zooming, and a few other options for any website. And so if you select any one of them, you just go down to the bottom right and either enable it, or if you have something like page zoom, you can go ahead and set your specific percentage there. The last thing I found is that Safari is now integrating a new HTML video player. So this is also incorporated with just default HTML players, but also if a site automatically starts playing a video when you land, Safari is going to go ahead and pause it for you and then just overlay this video player for you, and then you can hit play if you want to watch that video. Next, heading over to the photos, we've got some new settings in the sidebar. We've just got a couple new ways to organize our albums. We now have categories, so if you go to media types, you'll see the selfies, the live photos, all those kind of things there. And if you head over into the main Photos tab, you have a very similar navigation at the top as you do in iOS. You've got the Photos tabs, Moments, Collections, as well as Years. So that just kind of integrates the two so it's more familiar if you're an iOS user as well. Photos has also really upgraded their editing tools. So if you hit Edit at the top right there, you'll see a couple new things like white balance and levels, which is really helpful. And while this may not be a game changer for professional photographers, it can really help the average user with their everyday photos. But if you use third-party apps like Lightroom or Photoshop to edit your photos, you can actually integrate those apps with the main Photos app. And then any edits that you make and save will then be updated in the main Photos app. So you can still use Photos as a means to organize all your photos, but then you can still get the advantage of editing with more powerful apps like Photoshop. And to do that, all you have to do is just right-click on the photo, select Edit With, and then if you don't see the app that you want to edit with, you just go to Other and select Photoshop, or whatever app you're using, and then select open. Now the only downside here is that if the app that you want to edit with is not showing up, if you open it with that app, it's not going to appear in the menu, which is frustrating if you want to work with that app every time. The other main feature is that Apple has integrated a completely new file system. For the past 3 decades, they've been using an HFS Plus system, but with High Sierra, they are now integrating APFS, which just stands for Apple File System. And so this is a very behind the scenes change. You're not gonna open High Sierra and just experience APFS, but this is something you'll just notice over time. You'll notice faster responsiveness, specifically when you're copying and pasting. Another thing is when you select Get Info on a certain folder or hard drive, it won't take quite as long to scan and collect the size of all that data, and it will be a lot more responsive. And of course, you get the generic faster and safer data encryption and all the prevention against power outages and crashes and trying to keep your data safe. So all that is really great, but to give you just a quick example, I have a folder here that is about 2 gigs of photos, and I'm gonna copy it and just paste it to my desktop. And you can see that it's already pasted, and that was little to no time, and 2 gigs of photos used to take even just a couple minutes, but now it's happening in just a couple seconds. Another quick example is I have a video file that's about 500 megs, and I'm gonna paste that, and it's almost instant. Now, I know of course if you start pasting 30, 40, 50 gigs of files, it's gonna take a little bit longer, but it's gonna be significantly faster than it was in Sierra. Now, quite honestly, those are the biggest features I've been able to find in High Sierra. However, there are tons of little features that I want to just briefly touch on. Things like Spotlight will now let you track your flights. So all you have to do is just enter in the airline, type flight, and then just put the number, and it'll show you the progress for that flight. Notes has also added a couple new features. You can now integrate tables. So all you have to do is just add it to your toolbar, select the table icon, and you're pretty much good to go. Now, of course, these tables are a little bit limited in function, but if you just need a quick layout, you can do that in Notes now. Another thing is that you can now pin a certain note to the top of all your notes. So before in Sierra, we could swipe to the left and we could either make that note private or delete it. But now if we swipe to the right, we can actually pin it to the top. So any notes you add will always come below that note. And so if you're constantly working on a to-do list for your week, you can now pin that note to the top, which is super helpful. Another thing is if you scan in a picture to notes on your iPhone, you can now view those scans in your Mac Notes. And while you can't actually scan anything in on the Mac Notes, you'll at least be able to view them now. Siri also has a new updated voice to match that of iOS 11. Hey Siri, I heard you got a new voice.
You know what they say, a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still getting its pants on. I'm not sure I get it, but it's funny.
So if you're a Siri user, that's pretty cool, and they've also upgraded the UI and the other features to match iOS. Another small feature is that you can now add people to iCloud Drive. So if you're working in a document, you can come up to File, you can select Share, and then come over to this new option, Add People. And this is just a newer, faster way to share things with people if you're working in iCloud Drive. So of course the document or file has to be in iCloud Drive for this to work, but it's just a little bit faster than copying it into Messages or something similar. A couple other things I'm just gonna mention because they're not even worth showing is Mail has gotten a little bit faster at searching. They're now integrating with Spotlight just to pick that up a little bit. Metal 2 has now been added, and so this is pretty cool for virtual reality stuff. And I can't really show you because this is, again, is a behind the scenes kind of thing that you're just gonna see when new apps are added or other third-party integrations are included. Disk utility got a little bit of a facelift, so it's just a little bit easier to work with. And of course, Apple has now added HEVC video encoding. So they actually introduced this with iOS 11, and the whole gist of it is basically that it gives you about the same amount of quality of your video or photos, but it just stores them in smaller sizes. So it takes up less space, but looks just about as good. But unfortunately, this is only going to be able to be experienced on Macs with Skylake or Kaby Lake processors. So this pretty much means if you have a Mac from the last 2 or 3 years, it's going to work. Now I have a 2014 MacBook Pro, but I'm still rocking the Intel Core processors, so I don't actually get access to this. But for you video editors who have a new MacBook Pro, especially with the Touch Bar, you're going to be able to experience this new update. And speaking of compatibility, the official list for High Sierra devices is MacBook and iMac late 2009 and later, MacBook Air, MacBook Pro, and Mac Mini 2010 and later, and the Mac Pro 2010 and later. Now, of course, with any software updates, there's gotta be some bugs, and while I haven't done too much extensive testing because I wanted to get this video out to you guys as soon as possible, I have noticed a couple things, such as Finder just randomly rearranged my sidebar. It didn't delete anything, but it did just rearrange it, and it kind of took me a little while to get it back to normal. Notes actually began to freeze when I started dragging images into it, but this may have also just been a Finder bug because it was dragging from my desktop, but who really knows. Now, because I am a musician and I know some of you may be musicians out there, I did some brief testing with Ableton, Logic Pro, and MainStage. Now, I use Native Instruments, specifically Kontakt 5, for some of my pianos, and I noticed that none of the Native Instruments were working in any of the DAWs that I tried it in. So anytime I opened up a project in Ableton, Logic, or even MainStage that was running any sort of Native Instrument software, I got this error, and it's just missing all of the audio files and samples needed to run that VST. But as soon as you ignore that message, the DAW seemed to work fairly well. Now, I didn't notice too much problems with Logic when I started opening up some of my projects, other than just a couple missing files and samples. Once it reconnected, it worked, but I did experience a little bit of lagging when I would open up some instruments or just jump around the project. Now, as for Ableton, I'm running 9.7, and I have a project here with just over 400 or 500 audio samples. This is kind of my master project I use live. And again, other than Native Instruments, I didn't experience any issues. Like I said, I'm running hundreds of samples here, and it did the job just fine. And I did some serious tests here, just jumping around, changing the tempo, changing the time signature, tons of different things, as well as running a live keys rig and VSTs at the same time, and it seemed to handle it fairly well. The same pretty much goes for MainStage, and there are other DAWs out there as well. I just don't use them, and so I can't really show you. But as for musicians, you're probably familiar with the feeling of wanting to upgrade, but being torn between not wanting to experience bugs with your audio software. And the advice I can give to you is really just to give it a couple months, wait for these apps to update, because the features that you're going to be getting with High Sierra are honestly just not worth it. Now, while I do appreciate some of the updates that Apple has incorporated with this new OS, I've been pretty disappointed with the lack of features that they have to offer. Again, I know it is free, so I'm not going to complain too much, but this is kind of a major release, especially with some of the new hardware they're releasing, and so I just kind of expected something a little bit more. It feels like this update is really just setting the foundation for what's to come for Apple, as well as third-party apps and other integrations. Anyway, guys, that's been it for this video. I hope that helped you kind of get a sense of what you're gonna get with High Sierra. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit that like button down below, and be sure to comment your thoughts on the new Mac OS. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.